I'm here with Dr. Abdullah Mia. Do you want to say hello and just introduce yourself
Yeah.
to our viewers?
I'm Abdullah. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist and I work in a forensic medium secure unit in Birmingham. And I'm the clinical lead for that service.
And you gave a brilliant, really brilliant talk yesterday. You must have had loads of people coming up to you and congratulating you and asking you questions over the last couple of days.
Yeah, they've been coming up and saying really nice, friendly things. I suppose for me, there's something really wonderful about being able to connect with people. And most of the stuff that I like to talk about is around how do you connect with people? And if I can do that at a conference level, that feels really rewarding. As opposed to the idea of, I said at the start that most of the stuff that I talk about is the stuff that resonates with me. And I think that's what I want to do, that when I give out the stuff, they will resonate with whatever they want to resonate, and we form connections through that resonance. And I think I really like that part. So when people come up and give that feedback, I'm like, yeah, there's something that carries through. And I quite like that. It's a connection.
And it's really clear, kind of your authenticity really kind of came through in the talk, your sort of personal journey. And although you didn't necessarily talk about it a lot, it was kind of reading between the lines of your talk. You were talking a lot about your personal journey, your family background, your cultural background, what you do with your work, the fact that it's really hard. And I guess that's quite inspirational for this kind of audience, which is a real mix of people with lived experience and clinicians and researchers.
It is. I think it's a shame that we get put into these professional boxes that we put ourselves in as well. And we remove who we are from them. And we remove the social connections that we have. And what that leaves is just this. So I don't know if I mentioned it in the talk, but I quite like the idea that I say it's a bit like when you're making a curry. You can get a jar of curry sauce and you can make it and it'll taste okay. But if you bring yourself and you bring your social knowledge, it's like you're making curry from fresh and you've got the depth of flavor and it takes some time and you have to nurture it and you have to watch that it doesn't overcook, but it really flavors them. And I think that's the work that we do. And in conferences often, we don't get the opportunity. It's often the educator giving out information, whereas what BIGSPD really does well is let's share. Let's come together and share. And for me, that's a bit that it's been 5 years since I've been here. And as soon as I came back, I was just like, yeah, this is what conferences should be about.
Yeah, I know. I felt quite uncomfortable at certain points. And you said at the beginning of your talk, you may well feel uncomfortable, which I thought was a nice thing to warn people of. I think I felt uncomfortable because you weren't presenting any evidence. I'm coming from the research perspective.
Yeah.
So we just saw Sonia Johnson present boatload of evidence, which is really interesting and valuable. But you were coming at it from a much more emotional way and a much more a big picture perspective. And I think it sometimes takes a while for us to get into the rhythm of that sort of talk at this kind of conference.
So it's interesting. I'm going to pick up on two things, the evidence and the bigger picture stuff. I quite like the bigger picture stuff because for me, it makes me think of my position in the world, my position in my community, whatever community that is. And that's where I bring myself into it. So I've been raised in a community, whatever community that is. And I think that's why I quite like thinking, how does this fit with that part? And how do I fit in? And what's that going on there? The evidence part is an interesting thing because the evidence that I'm talking about is the stuff that usually comes out, sadly, in serious incident reviews when things go wrong. And we talk about the idea that there isn't a connection, there isn't open communication, there isn't transparency. And we hear that in serious incident reviews a lot. But the theoretical stuff that I presented was primarily around how do we understand what happens when we get these bad practices, but also, interestingly, what the good practices are. And I think one of the things I'm really conscious of is we live in this society where we have to constantly just make sure we're doing good. And then we have that blind spot that we never consider when we're doing bad or when we're doing harm. I don't like the idea of bad, but when we're doing harm. And I find myself often that if there's a pull to really only focus on the good, I have a tendency to go, right, okay, what am I missing? What's in my blind spot? And that comes from a minority perspective. So for me, as a minority, it's always around where's that voice that you don't hear? And the same with the arguments. So conferences are very evidence-based in a scientific rigor. quantitative or qualitative studies, but we lose the human connection in that. And when we think about where's the voice of the human connection, it often falls to lived experience or minority groups to provide that. And I think, actually, no. Why don't we, as professionals who might have lived experience or not, how do we also come alongside that? And for me, it's the same kind of thing as if you think about the anti-racism literature. Currently in the anti-racism literature, what we used to do is we used to focus a lot on cultural competence and making sure we know about all the different communities. That's impossible because people are complex beings. But if we relied on cultural humility and we thought, okay, I don't know, but I'm going to ask. But I know myself. And if I know myself, I know where my blind spots are and I'll still ask. And I think that's what I wanted to encourage in that talk in particular, which is hard.
And some of the questions or the comments, kind of allyship almost from the floor at the end, you had some really challenging questions. How can we do this when it's so hard? And I kind of got this sense of, I can't answer this question. It's really difficult. But the sense of, standing alongside each other to do this work.
So I mentioned a little bit about consumerism in the talk. And I think when people ask for that, they're really wanting a solution. And that, I think, reinforces this. There is a problem and there is a fixed solution, and we can buy or we can produce that fixed solution. Now, the reality is there isn't a fixed solution. We're so multifaceted as humans. And if you think about the idea that I have a whole set of experiences and me talking to you, there's a whole set of your experiences, and we come together, that's two people with at least 20 different experiences, say. And then we bring another person in, another person. Before you know it, as an organization or a system or a team or a community, how are we going to find the perfect solution for everyone? We can't. But there's this implicit assumption that we will. And when people ask this question, I think part of it is, I don't want to sit with this discomfort too long. Tell me how to make it better. And what I was really thinking was, I'm not going to do that. I might have a little bit of an idea, but what I think we need to practice experientially is, let's just sit with this. Well, we don't know, but there's ways in which we have to sit with the hard work, and that's the disappointment stuff. Sometimes we are disappointed in the ideas that we generate because they're not good enough, and we have to keep going back and reiterating, and that cyclical work is hard, and acknowledging that it's hard work.
And we're disappointed in ourselves as practitioners, or we're disappointed in our patients for not getting it right. I think that kind of embracing disappointment, embracing uncertainty was a really powerful part of your talk.
I said something that I think really resonated with a lot of people, especially those with lived experience, it seems. I think as in the NHS, you're not allowed to express disappointment. You should always be moving towards excellence and brilliance in developing. But in doing so, we don't allow space to validate our own feelings that we have some really complex, challenging situations and we can't make them better, right? What we can do is make them easier, but not better. And because we deny that within ourselves, I think unconsciously you project that onto the service user, the patient. And then we go, oh, you're just not doing it right. You're not doing it right. You need to do it better. As opposed to going, there's two of us here, or there's multiple people. How are we not doing things, and how could we do it different? And that for me is around the idea of how do we hold the pain that we have and not expel it onto the other person? Because it's far easier to ignore it and pretend we're all okay. There's no issues here. It's just the problems out there.
And what's the direction of travel, do you think, in the services, in the NHS generally at the moment, in terms of that kind of risk-averse culture? Because it feels like that kind of openness to disappointment and harm causing is not allowed.
It's not, you're right. What's really interesting, I think we've entered into this really strange space where we're almost denying what happened in 2020 and 2021. And I'm referencing COVID here. So in 2020 and 2021, what we decided to do as a healthcare service was really innovate. We couldn't do. So the things around video calling, and in our forensic service, we allowed mobile phones. All of that, just like that, because we had to do it for patient care. And I think one of the things about it is that when we want to do it, we'll make things happen. The challenge is we're now in this space where we know we've been able to do things and we've put appropriate governance structures in. But now we're going back to this strange kind of, I don't know if we're allowed to, I don't know if we can. And it's helping people to go, whoa, 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 remember, and I spoke about institutional memory. Remember we did this in 2020. What facilitated that? How did we get there? And it's about the idea that we all shared a common enemy. There was no splitting between the patient service users and the staff. It was, there's an enemy out there called COVID. We need to work together. So what I would hope we move towards, without an enemy, how do we come together? And I think it's interesting because I was talking with others in the conference and we were saying there seems to be a shift again into a space where people are really focusing on relational work. And I think we've realized that the way we've been practicing cognitivism and rationalism in that way has been a bit too far. The pendulum swung a little bit too far. And we just need to bring the pendulum back again to think about relationally working. And we can still do cognitive therapy or whatever it is and rational work, but we have to have that emotional work. And I always find that a really difficult thing, that we talk about mental health as if it's all rational. There are only rational problems. And I'm like, it's an emotional problem. So why don't we talk on an emotional level and combine it with a rational integration? But I think we find that hard. And I mentioned someone called Rory Sutherland, and he talks about the ideas, how can we buy into emotional arguments without needing a rationale?
Fabulous. It's been lovely chatting with you. Thanks a lot for hanging around after the conference. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of it.
Thank you. It's been great.